The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $40, and the slickest man in the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Wendell Coombe did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked at what he had bought. A tall, rusted, bone-dry, visible register gas pump standing seized and alone at the far end of the lot. A narrow column of pitted iron near 10 feet to the top, with a glass measuring cylinder up high, gone amber with old grime, and a round glass globe on a slim post above it. The kind of pump that hadn't pushed a gallon in half a lifetime. A pump the estate had dragged out of a collapsed roadside filling station that morning, that 100 bidders had walked past and waved off as a rusted lawn ornament, and that Wendell had just paid $40 to own, globe, cylinder, and all. It was a bright, hot Saturday morning, the kind of clear day that makes a gravel lot shimmer, at a farm and estate auction held along the weedy frontage of an old shut-down filling station at the edge of a mid-sized county town. Wendell was 72 years old, lean and a little bent through the shoulders from a lifetime of close work, with a deeply lined face burned brown by the weather, short white hair under a flat tweed cap, white stubble, and pale, steady eyes that did not move fast. His hands were broad and thick at the knuckle, scarred along the fingers and stained dark in the creases. The hands of a man who had spent 50 years easing seized machines apart and coaxing dead iron back to life. Wendell had run a small one-man repair shop his whole working life, the man they sent for when a pump quit or a flywheel froze or an old engine wouldn't turn, until the work went over to parts changers and quietly dried up and let men like him go. The man who laughed was Royce Tetlow, who ran the busiest antiques-and-salvage flip operation in 3 counties. A heavy-set man of about 54 in a loud, rust-orange sport coat, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a phone always in the other. $40, Roy said loud so the whole lot could hear it. $40 for a rusted lawn ornament old-timer. No glass left worth a dime, no pump in her. The works are 40 years seized solid. That thing hasn't pushed a gallon since before you and I had hair. You can't fix her. Nobody can fix her. You didn't buy a gas pump. You bought a rusted pole with a busted bowl on top, and you paid $40 for the hauling. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry, the dead pole. And it stuck for the rest of that month. The crowd laughed because Royce laughed, the way a crowd does. Wendell stood through it without a change in his face, his thumbs hooked in his belt, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it was stuck and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe. Because the people who stay for stories like Wendell's are exactly who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Wendell said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What none of them knew, what Royce Tetlow could not have known, grinning behind his phone, was that Wendell had stood in front of that pump with more than 50 years awake in him and with something older than that besides. The crowd saw a rusted pole with a bowl on top. Wendell saw the pump. He saw the slim, fluted column under the rust, cast and finished by a maker who took pride in it. Not the cheap stamped curbside pumps the big outfits turned out by the thousand. He saw the round glass globe up on its post, cracked but whole, and even blind with grime he could make out the shape of the brand fired into it, a make he had not seen since he was young. And he knew the station. He had pumped gas at that very station in his own youth, 50-odd years before. For the family that owned it, and the pump seized at the end of that lot was the same tall, visible pump he had worked in the long summers of his youth. The one folks used to stop and watch fill the glass up top before it ran down into their tanks. The rest of them were pricing the scrap iron by the pound. Wendell knew the difference between a thing the world stamped out by the gross and a thing a maker built to last and be looked at. And what Wendell found when he worked that pump open that night would change how a whole town remembered a family it had long since let itself forget. Wendell had come up hard. He went to work young at that roadside filling station out on the old county highway, pumping gas and wiping windshields and learning the guts of the place, and across the years he made himself into a mechanic of the rare kind, the one a man called when a machine froze and no parts book would say why. His wife Maren had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own, and after Maren was gone, he lived alone behind his shuttered shop with his tools and his quiet. The town had a use for his hands and no use at all for his memory. He knew that. He bid on the pump anyway. He bid because he knew it. A pump like that is the record of a whole roadside life set down in iron and glass, and a man who had stood at that very pump in his youth could no more walk past it for scrap than walk past his own past. The crowd had seen a dead pole. Wendell had seen the station as it was, the lit globe glowing at dusk, the glass cylinder filling amber up top, the family that gave a young man his first honest work. If you've made it this far into Wendell's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the estate first, the furniture and the fixtures and the boxed-up odds knocked down to the dealers while Wendell waited at the end of the lot. When the auctioneer finally came to the tall, rusted pump at the back and called for a bid, Royce glanced at it, called out his joke about the rusted pole, and not one other hand went up. Wendell raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 40. He paid in cash at the trailer, signed the slip, and arranged to bring his truck around at the end of the day. Because the auction rules gave a man until dark to load what he had bought. The story got around the town before Wendell's truck was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, when he was going to open the filling station back up. Harlan Spivey, who ran the hardware, said it plainer than the rest, that there was nothing to a dead curbside pump but rusted iron and broken glass and a long afternoon hauling it to the scrapyard. Wendell was buying a tin of fine oil and a packet of clean rag and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent 50 years learning that a thing is either built true or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which one. But Wendell did not work the pump open in the heat of the day, with the dealer's trucks still in the lot and Royce holding court by the auction trailer. He waited until the place had emptied out and he had the pump home, standing tall in the middle of his barn under a single work lamp, and went at it alone that night, after the road had gone quiet and the windows up the lane had gone dark. The base of the pump was sealed, a heavy cast-iron pedestal with a small rusted access door bolted into the side, the bolts frozen with 50 years of rust, and rather than break it, he worked it slow and careful, soaking the bolts and easing them the way you open a thing somebody else closed with care, and when the little door finally swung back, the smell that came out was rust and old oil and dust gone thick, not the sour smell of rot, but the smell of a place shut up a long time. Down at the diner they were still asking if he'd gotten his lawn ornament to pump yet. Wendell set his lamp on the bench and stood a moment in front of the open base, reading the pump the way he would read a dead machine before the first turn of a wrench. The pump had its own long, sad history, and the town had let it go to rust with never once asking after it. It ran all the way back to the family whose whole life was sealed inside that iron. A quiet couple named Alton and Adela Mercer, who had built and run that little roadside filling station on the old County Highway 60 years before, back when that highway was the only road through and every car that passed had to stop. They had put their savings into the station and a tall, visible pump that folks slowed down to watch, and run it honest and run it well, and then the new 4-lane highway came through 2 miles north and took the traffic with it, and the cars stopped coming, and the station starved slow and then died, and the Mercers lost the place, and were forgotten so completely that not one person in that town could have told you their names. What none of the town ever asked was what becomes of a family's whole life's work, and the takings and the record they kept, when the road moves and the work dies, and the people leave with nobody to remember them. The answer had been standing in a collapsed station the whole time, sealed in the base of a $40 pump nobody wanted to open. Wendell started with the base, because a careful man works in order, and the inside of that pedestal told him whose pump it was before he ever read the globe. The cast iron column was filthy and seized, but under the rust it was beautiful, fluted and finished and fitted by a maker who thought a working pump deserved to be looked at, every casting clean, nothing cheap. Wendell had eased 1,000 seized machines apart, and he had rarely opened one made with this much care. And there, low inside the base where only a man servicing the pump would ever reach, bolted to the inner wall behind the works, was a heavy tin box, and Wendell worked it free and set it on the bench under the lamp and went very still. It was a cash tin, the old station's takings tin, and the lid was rusted, but the seal had held, and inside, wrapped and dry, was a thick fold of old banknotes the Mercers had sealed away, the last takings of a station that died before they could bank them, the money a starving family had hidden in the one place no buyer or scrapper would ever look. And folded down beside the cash, in a wrap of waxcloth gone soft as skin, was a hand-kept ledger, the station's own book, every gallon and every dollar set down in a careful, slanting hand across the years the place had lived. But the cash and the book were only the start of it. With the base open, Wendell carried his lamp up the column to the round glass globe on its post, cleaned the grime from it with a careful thumb, and the brand fired into the curved glass came up clear under the light, and he held the lamp close and read it, and the back of his neck went cold. It was a make he had not seen since he was young, a defunct fuel brand long gone under, the globe of a maker the field had thought all gone, and below the brand, cast into the base ring of the globe itself, was the model mark of the pump, a visible register design he knew by reputation the way a tradesman knows a legend. He had heard 50 years ago and since that of all the tall visible pumps that maker ever cast, this particular globe-top model had been built in the smallest run and scrapped near to the last one, melted down for the iron in the lean years, so that collectors had long counted it gone, the last of its kind. Wendell knew what that meant, that the rusted pole the crowd had laughed at was not junk at all, but the sole surviving example of its model, an irreplaceable piece worth a small fortune to a museum of the road or a private collector, far past anything the rusted hulk had ever looked. And the ledger told the rest in the family's own hand. Wendell sat down on his stool under the work lamp and turned the soft pages, and the whole life of the station was in there. The early years when the figures ran strong, the steady, honest middle, and then the slow falling off after the new highway opened, the gallons dropping month on month, and the dollars thinning until the last entries were so small they broke a man's heart to read. And on the last page, after the figures stopped, Adela Mercer had written a few lines in that careful hand, meant for whoever finally came, that they had sealed the last of the takings in the base, because the bank was 2 towns over and the road was empty, and they could not bear to leave the station with nothing of it kept. That they had built the place with their own hands and run it true for 30 years, and that if a body ever found this, they should know the Mercers had been here, and done honest work, and loved the little station even at the end when the cars stopped coming. Wendell read it twice through, and the only man in that county who had ever stood at that very pump in his youth now held the proof of a whole forgotten family's life in 2 hands, the rarity cast in the glass and the truth set down in the book. The next morning Wendell did not call a single dealer to sell, and he did not put the pump up for the scrap money, and he did not keep the cash for himself, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent 1 whole month being the man who paid $40 for a rusted pole, and he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of them. He carried photographs of the globe and the model mark and the ledger first to the County Historical Society and then to the curator of a regional museum of the roadside 2 towns over, because the proof of who the Mercers were mattered to him more than what the pump would bring. The curator went very still over the photographs and said quietly that a complete, untouched visible register pump of that model, the last known to survive, long counted gone, with its original globe hole and the station's own ledger and sealed takings intact, was the kind of thing a museum waits a lifetime for and almost never finds whole. The pump, she said, was not a rusted lawn ornament at all. It was the sole surviving example of its make. And the column alone belonged behind glass where people could stand in front of it the way the travelers once had. A private collector of roadside antiques, written to next, named for the last of its kind globe-top pump, and its documented family story a sum that made the whole $40 auction look like the joke Royce had meant it as. And the town, once the Historical Society began asking after the old family who had built the station on the highway and lost it when the road moved, slowly started to remember. An elderly woman named Verna Dolph, who had grown up on the old highway back when the Mercers station still ran, and was the nearest thing to a living memory anyone could find, came up to the museum on a gray morning to see the pump set on its stand, and when she read the card that told the story of the family and the road that died, she put one hand flat over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she did not say anything for a long time. She had half believed the town's version that the pump was only a dead curbside relic, and the ledger told her instead that it was a family's whole life, run honest for 30 years and sealed away with a few quiet words when the road took everything else. She asked to meet the man who had opened the pump, and Wendell came to the door in his shirt sleeves while she thanked him with her voice shaking, and all he said was that the Mercers had built that pump and that station to last and had trusted somebody would come who could read it. There was one thing more Wendell did before the pump left his barn, and he did it for the dead family and for no one else. He cleaned the calm, the slow, careful way over a week of nights, eased the seized works free, polished the iron, and trued the cracked globe on its post, not to make a show of it, but because a family who built their whole living around a pump deserved to have it stand whole. And he did not pour fuel through it and make it pump again, because a working pump was the most ordinary thing in the world, the very thing it had done 10,000 times for 10,000 cars, and there was no truth in it. The truth was the cash a starving family had sealed away in faith, and the book they kept honest to the last small entry, and the rare iron the world had thrown out for scrap. So on the last night, with the museum's truck coming in the morning, Wendell stood the tall column hole in the middle of his barn under the work lamp, the cleaned globe catching the light up top, the old ledger and the tin set careful at its base, and looked at it a long, quiet while, a station's whole life, kept and proven and ready to be seen, and then switched off the lamp and let it rest. He had not freed the works to make the pump pump again. That part was never the point. He had freed it so that the family who built it and ran it true and sealed their last honest dollar inside it would be known one time by somebody who finally understood what they were. That summer, the pump and the ledger and the sealed takings went where they belonged, into a public hall with the mercer's name on a plate beside it at last, and not one person in that town ever again called what stood at the end of that lot a rusted lawn ornament. Word of it went around the same as the laughter had, only quieter. And the people who had called Wendell a fool let the name the dead pole drop and did not pick it up again. Royce Tetlow was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look at, and the next time he held court by the auction trailer, the others did not lean in so far. Wendell never said a word against him. Being right was the whole of what he had wanted, and it had brought a forgotten family's name and a vanished station's honest work back up out of the dust. The museum kept the pump where the town could see it. They set the tall column behind clean glass under a soft light in the front hall, the iron oiled and whole, the round globe lit gold at last on its post, the way it had glowed at dusk on the old highway 60 years before, the mercer's name cut at last into a plate at its base, Alton A.N.D. Idella Mercer, and the station on the old highway. And beside it, the hand-kept ledger open to Idella's last quiet lines, and a card that told whoever came through that the family who built it had run an honest station for 30 years, had sealed their last takings and their whole record in a pump where no one looked for 60 years, and that what stood rusted and laughed at on a county lot was the truest thing their work ever left behind. And on a still evening that next summer, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Wendell Coombe drove over to look in on it, and there in the last of the sun stood the tall pump, whole and lit and seen at last, the globe glowing soft on its post where a stranger's hands had finally uncovered it. Wendell was 72 years old, a man the auction had laughed at one whole month, and he stood quiet a long moment and laid one broad scarred hand flat on the cool glass and nodded once, the way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had set it for him, the way work always did. A family pours their whole life into an honest place on a road and seals their last truth where no one will look, and trust that somebody will come who can read what it was. So that being forgotten can never be the same as never having been, and a town rarely knows what was made true on its own quiet roads until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Wendell Coombe right to give the pump and every dollar of the sealed takings to a museum and a vanished family's memory without keeping a cent, or was that one decency too far? In a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.